Hi everyone, I'm Jack the Rambling Raconteur, and I hope that you're doing well. I'd like to share a few thoughts on Of Cattle and Men by Paula and Maia. This is an extraordinary novel. It's a very short novel, but it's one of the best books I've read this year. I cannot recommend it highly enough. It is a book that is a deep, bleak meditation on life and death. Honestly, it's a book that could have been titled Dispatches from the Edge of Hell. Because that is where we feel like we spend most of our time in this short novel. Maia gives us the voice of Edgar, the voice of an every person as our main character. He's a man who finds himself a cog in the machinery of death, literally, because he is working at a slaughterhouse. And so through Edgar's meditations on his life, through the interactions he has with his colleagues at work, the interactions he has with others who sort of interrogate what his job is and why he does this job, Maia draws this circle of complicity around so many people on Earth about how this hellscape is created. And the writing is extraordinary and painful. I wanted to read an example of that as we start. The river is deserted. It's a dead river, and it's rare to find anyone fishing on it. Some use small rudimentary boats to cross it on a calm day, and others take a chance on contaminated fish still flopping about. A fish's eyes, even after it's dead, gleam, reflecting the sunlight. A ruminant's eyes are black as night. Inside them is only darkness, and it cannot be trespassed, perpetually unfathomable. It's called Rio das Moscas, and ever since slaughterhouses began to spring up around the region known as Ruminant Valley, its clean waters have brimmed with blood. All kinds of things, organic and inorganic, lie at the bottom, human and animal. The wind shakes the tree branches and makes the grass lie back on itself, creates ripples on the surface of the river, its waters enveloped in hollow silence between the mountains, which lends a feeling of eternity to the valley's landscape. And there's something horrible about the idea that this landscape is eternal, because it is a landscape from hell. There's a river from hell. There's something almost biblical, as in the Hebrew Bible, the Christian Old Testament, that feels just horrifying about this landscape, terrifying. And Edgar is a man at the slaughterhouse. He is the man who has the job of being the one who kills the cattle. He's the last one the cattle see because he's empathizing with the cattle. He calms them, he stills them, he puts them to sleep right before he jabs them in the forehead. And so Maia asks this question, as Edgar asks the question of himself. What does it mean to have this job? What does it mean to be part of this machinery of death? What does it mean to kill cattle in order to make the meat for hamburgers, let alone steaks, that Edgar will never be able to afford to purchase? He and his friends at one point are able to, they receive a little box of hamburger meat from the warehouse as sort of a bribe for the fact that a check was late. And they share the hamburgers and they eat it. And for many of them, it's the first hamburger they've ever tasted. And they think, wow, this is so precious. It tastes so good. And yet we know what happens to make this. And it's disgusting on a level. And so that horror just continues to build throughout the book. We see the dehumanizing aspect of these men's lives, what they are reduced to. They live barely above the level of subsistence. They eke out a living, but again, they can never afford the goods that they're helping produce. And the landscape they live in just becomes more and more dreadful. At one point, someone tastes water from the river and realizes how salty it tastes. And again, it seems like a river from hell. All of the fish are dying in that salty river. And so Maia continues to ask the question, what does it mean? But she endows Edgar with these empathetic impulses towards the cattle. And that gives it this other level of power. Edgar Wilson lights a cigarette and decides to stick around another 5 minutes. Now alone and in silence, from where he stands, he watches the cows grazing in open pens enclosed with barbed wire fencing. He walks over to one of the pens and notices that some of the fences are no longer as taut as they should be. In the late afternoons, when dusk begins to crack open ruddy crevices in the sky like rifts in a volcano, the cattle leave their pasture and huddle in small groups under a tree. But today is overcast and the sky, instead of that crimson hue, will be rimmed in charcoal. Edgar likes to watch the confined animals. Alone or in small groups, they keep the same pace when they chew or swish their tails. Cattle, every one of them, graze to the north, as they can sense the Earth's magnetic pull. Few know the reason behind this, but the people who work with cattle every day know they adhere to a code of conduct, and they all stand facing the same direction while grazing. This sort of harmony is unheard of in men. A cow approaches Edgar. Slowly she moves her flanks majestically while chewing a handful of grass. He strokes the animal's head. The cow has a brown mark on her forehead in the shape of a teardrop. He will certainly remember her when they come face to face again. He finishes his cigarette and turns to go back to the stun box. He sighs, sorrowful. It's his job, the only one keeping him alive. He looks back, the ruminants that are grazing quietly, standing in groups or alone. Soon he'll come face to face with all of them, Edgar, the murderous beast himself. And that voice is truly painful across this book. I don't know that it could have been any longer, because the despair that Maia digs at, the despair in Edgar's existence, his friends' existences, the way that he knows he's barely eking out a living. They can't afford a truck or a car. They live right next to the slaughterhouse. They smell it all day long. There's a man who, to make extra money to buy his daughter eyeglasses, will try to hold his breath in a barrel of water and collect just 50 cents to be able to mail to his daughter to buy her glasses. And he does this over and over every day, nearly drowning himself in order to make that extra little cash. The way that Edgar sees all of this, and the pain he feels, the way he can, barely find a reason to get up and keep going the next day, is a very deep and painful and horrifying. And yet, there's something beyond that. There is this sense of community that exists here. And there's this aspect of hope that even at the edge of hell, there is a human desire for community. And while Edgar has contrasted the fact that the cattle possess a harmony that is unfound of in men, he notes that there's this impulse that we have to infer as readers, but there's this impulse within Edgar and within characters like Bronco Gil, who's this fascinating side character, someone straight out of Faulkner, who they desire harmony. They desire a hint of community. And that there's a deep power in that. And Maia is very effective in making sure that we see those hints of humanity in each of these men and in them as individuals. In an earlier passage, she notes, Edgar Wilson is briefly dismayed. Silence blankets their heads. These are the confessions of blood and death of those who have already been condemned. There are others like them on the side of that same road, both above ground and below it. The murmur of those who never returned echoes against the rocks, a lamentation, because when there is no one to pray, the rocks cry out. They sit in silence for the rest of the trip. Erasmo Wagner thanks him for the ride a second time, and pushing his bicycle with the flat tire, walks towards the plant. As he continues on his way, Edgar Wilson's thoughts are fixed on the darkness of the ruminant's eyes, endeavoring to locate some small sign that might unveil the mystery. However hard he tries, his imagination casts no light, neither on the darkness of those unfathomable eyes, nor on the darkness that cloaks his own wickedness. And he reconciles himself every day to this life. But at one point, Maia gives us an interaction that allows Edgar to be interrogated by someone other than himself. A group of students arrive who are going to see how meat is made from the farm to the slaughterhouse, all the way through to the meat packing plant and how it's shipped out. And so they come here, and the students want to interrogate Edgar. Don't you think you're a criminal? Don't you think this is awful? Like, isn't this a horror show that you're part of? And he doesn't want to argue with them, but he wants to draw the idea that they're complicit in it too. So many of us are complicit in this absolute destruction of Earth, of what is living on Earth, in order to feed ourselves, in order to feed our desires, to sate our desires. And in a sense, we create the hell around us. Not dissimilar from the way bacteria react, where they will poison their own environment to make it more livable and comfortable for themselves. And so Maia draws these connections, and it's absolutely fascinating. It's stunning. It requires the deepest reflection from a reader. And yet it's, as I said, one of the finest books I've read this year. The translation was from Zoe Perry, and I will be looking to read anything I can get my hands on from this writer. Now, I was reminded of several books. There are explicit connections to Cormac McCarthy in comparisons within the book itself, the landscapes he draws, the way that he seems to write about a true hell on earth. I was thinking of The Crossing, most specifically, with the idea, the connection between cattle. The sensibilities of Horacio Quiroga, the great short story writer from Uruguay, did not feel far from this. He was a man who, again, seemed to peer into this despair of humanity, the despair of existence, to take that despair and embrace the nihilism that's on the other side of it, that Edgar never quite gets to, but that Maia hints could be there. And Horacio Quiroga's stories are certainly some of the finest that plumb that despair. I have a video on his story, The Decapitated Chicken, which I'll link in the description box below. Another writer I was reminded of would certainly be David Diop with At Night All Blood is Black. The subject matter is very different, but the hint of hell on earth is right there. There are some comparisons to Clarice Lispector. I thought of her short story, The Chicken, which is absurd satire, sort of around the same idea as a chicken tries to run off so that it is not the dinner for the family that night. But Lispector provides a different perspective on the stories from individuals living in Brazil. Another writer would be Gabriela Cabezon Camara with The Adventures of China Iron. This is a book that is a sort of revisionist Western, not dissimilar from the aspects of Cattle and Men that seem to be a revisionist Western. This goes in a very different direction, a queer identity, and the emphasis of indigenous identities. And Maia's going in a different direction, but they each have something to say that's very different from what we think of the stories of gauchos, or the stories that come from people dealing with cattle. Another indictment of sort of economic systems and the oppression they just beget within communities would be Devil on the Cross by Ngūgī va Thiong'o. Other books that deal with the sense of a true, just despairing narrative would be Resurrection Man by Eoin McNamee, or 1977 by David Peace, any of David Peace's novels, frankly. And then finally, the voice of an every person. There is a distinct similarity to that every person voice that Edgar has compared to something like Stoner by John Williams. The books seem totally different, but that voice, that haunting, quiet voice that just keeps insisting on a sense of integrity within a life that seems to be utterly compromised is there. And then another set of stories would be those from Robert Olmstead in River Dogs. These are set in rural New England and show people who are sort of living on the margins of just being able to make it work on a farm. So let me know if you've read anything else by Paula Maia. Let me know if you've read this book. It's about 10 years old, but the translation is fairly new, and I hope everyone's doing well. Thank you.